Today, I'm very excited to introduce Pamela Bragg, owner of Sarkany Management. Pamela is no stranger to our industries, as she provides strategic human resource approaches to some of Western Canada's largest contracting, construction, and transportation companies. She is a versatile executive with over 25 years strategic and operational management experience. As an international HR director for a multinational construction materials company, she supported the cement, concrete, asphalt, pave, and construction product lines in Canada and the US. Pamela holds a master's certificate in strategic human resources and organizational change from Royal Roads, certificates from Stanford in diversity and inclusion for organizational excellence, and corporate governance from Wharton Executive School of Business. You can learn more about Pamela and her services at sarkanymanagement.com. Please join me in welcoming Pamela Bragg. Welcome, Pamela.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for that introduction, and welcome everybody to why supervisory skills matter for retention. As Dan indicated in his introduction about labor shortages in Canada, let's face it, we know your industry is facing unprecedented labor shortages, and we don't see that abating anytime in the near future. So some people are calling it the Great Recession. Other people are calling it the Gray Tsunami, meaning as baby boomers continue to retire. Others are calling it the Great COVID Reset. Whatever your reality in your workplace is, we just know that workplaces are changing, and doing more with less, and by less, I mean people, is likely your new normal, at least in the short to medium term. If we looked at some statistics from across Canada, and we'll look at a number of statistics today, but I won't overwhelm you with them because they're boring, but they do help us paint a picture. We could look back to the second quarter of 2022, so just 6 months ago. Canada alone, we saw more than 1 million vacant jobs. That's astronomical, given there's only 38 million people in Canada, and of that, how many are actually in the workforce? So 1 million vacancies across Canada. And these shortages, like I said, are in large part due to the baby boomers, those that are in or around very late 50s that are now retiring. There were a lot of baby boomers born at that time. So there's a great deal of them in the workforce, in particular in your workforce and in this industry, as they continue to retire at an astronomical rate. In fact, they're almost all but gone. There's a small percentage of them left, but as they continue to exit the Canadian workforce, they are leaving huge gaps in the labor forces in all sectors. And there's just not enough Canadians or babies being born, if you will, to fill these gaps in the short and long term. So, that sounds all very doom and gloom, but this all leads to why companies like the ones you work for are struggling to find talent, because there's just not enough bodies. But not only that, where you fit into it is then how do we retain the talent that we do get in the door? And a lot of the focus from a lot of companies has been on giving the employees more pay, more benefit. And if your company needs to address those things, absolutely, they should. However, that's not the only solution. It doesn't tell the whole story. There's a whole other area that needs attention, and that is the critical role of the supervisors. Organizations are going to have to continue to put a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. And I'm going to be using the term supervisors today. What I mean by that is anybody in any sector, in any part of this industry that manages other people. So it doesn't matter if it was in the office or in dispatch or managing trucks going out to a job site. When I say supervisor, is anybody who manages anybody else. So more and more organizations are going to say, well, if we can't address the labor issues, then we need to retain them. And how do we do that? Well, then we need to look at our supervisors, because the impact that you have on retention is astronomical. And why the sudden change? Well, supervisors of yesterday were the person who was the best dispatcher or the best truck driver, and then they got promoted. They were selected and promoted largely based on their ability to carry out a certain task. And today's supervisors, as we're finding, are now going to be poised to be great coaches, effective communicators, people who can tap into the needs of their workforce and give appropriate feedback. So you can see that your role, regardless of what company you're in and what part of the organization you're in, is becoming more and more complex. So that was a long introduction for a title slide, but that's just my way of saying today we're going to be talking about just one of the skills that today's supervisors need, and that is, what role do you have? And it's right there on your screen in the smaller font. What role do you have in keeping the talent in your organization from walking out the door? And that's what the next hour is what we're going to talk about. There's my company name, and my company name and my name. I have contact information on the last slide, but Dan gave a great introduction, and thank you very much. So with no further ado, I'm just going to move on. Let's talk about a little bit of the overview of what our hour together is going to look like. As we know, the concrete and construction industry, and by concrete and construction, I do mean cement and all associated businesses and industries that go along with that. As Dan said in his introduction with Concrete Wins Alberta, that there's 8 different associations. So when I say concrete and construction, I'm being inclusive of all of them. They are facing, as we know, an increase in what we call voluntary turnover. Involuntary turnover is when somebody says you're fired or we no longer want you. Voluntary is when the employee makes the decision. So that's what we're talking about today. Voluntary turnover, a lack of skilled labor, a rise in vacancies, and the like. The complication in this is that it is impacting your company's ability to be productive. It's probably impacting your ability at the local level, managing a crew or managing trucks. Is impacting your ability to be productive, as well as ongoing employee departures. The cost of replacing them is significant, and that leads to also when you don't have enough employees, you have a reduction of work. So really an endless cycle and a downward spiral. And many organizations tackle retention, as I said in my introduction, from a compensation and benefit perspective, but this doesn't consider the whole problem. I have a whole bunch of appendix items at the end of the presentation. I will send them to Dan. Dan, you can, Dan and Alicia, you can distribute this package if you like. Whole bunch of information in there about generational impact. And there's a huge, which I'd love to get into. The hour won't give us time, so we won't have time to tackle that issue, but the generational needs and desires of Zs versus Ys versus millennials does complicate the retention issue even more. And that's to that last point on your screen there, that when we're tackling retention from a compensation or benefit perspective, that's great. But what we're finding is a lot of the younger generations care less about that and more about other things like company culture and the like. So there's some slides at the end that you can certainly peruse at your leisure. We just won't have time to get to them today. One of the solutions, because I'm not saying this is the only solution, but one solution to the overall lack of skilled labor in your industry is to target you all, supervisors, for the key to engagement and retention, and as well as working with your management teams to develop solutions to retain the top talent. So I'm going to ask you a question that I'd like you to ponder. Because we're being recorded, we probably won't be interacting necessarily on this, but I'm going to ask you this question, and just think about it for a sec. What do you think is the number one reason that people quit their jobs? You can reflect on maybe jobs that you've had and you've quit in the past, but of the top reasons that one of the top reasons that people resign is this: people don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses. And by bosses, I mean supervisors. I could go on. I'm going to put a whole bunch of headlines up here. There was no shortage of these. I could have gone on and found a great many. But look, there's a lot of studies. There's a lot of headlines. But study after study is telling us the same thing, that people don't quit their jobs. They quit their bosses. And you, as a supervisor, are their boss. People don't recognize their boss's boss or the boss's boss's boss or the owner of the company. They're too disconnected from it. So when they say they quit their boss, it's typically their frontline or first line a supervisor. Or there's another great saying that people leave managers, not companies. And research is telling us that that's clearly the case. Bad or ineffective bosses are the greatest liability to the organization and the greatest area that companies can be focusing on right now in terms of retaining your people. So it's critical to not only attract people to your industry, but once you get them, how do you keep them? And certainly you have a huge role in that. Let's look at some other statistics before we jump into, what you can do as a supervisor. Let's look at the concrete workforce and some threats that this workforce, construction, concrete, cement, and the like is facing. An estimated 20% of the current Canadian workforce will need to be replaced over the next 10 years due to retirements. And this trend is showing little evidence of slowing down over, like I said, the short to medium term. Here's some more. An aging labor force in Canada and the expected retirement of over 250,000 construction workers remains a key driver of demand requirements on the next decade. By 2029, which is all but around the corner, the Canadian construction industry will need to recruit, train, and retain over 300,000 new workers. That's your industry alone. So when we're talking about currently 1 million vacancies across Canada, that's currently, but by 2029, 300,000 workers. And again, we just don't have the population to support that. So these numbers are staggering in terms of retention, because if I was the owner of a company and a construction company or one in this industry, this would probably scare the daylights out of me. And I would be likely focusing on succession and retention efforts, likely on top of everything else. It truly is becoming a business priority. Here's some other stats that you may find interesting. This is a study by the McKinsey Institute. A lot of their work I love. They found that 38, let me put that up there. Hold on a second here. In your sector, 38% of workers in this industry, in trade, transportation, and utilities, are somewhat likely to leave their job in the next 3 to 6 months. And overall, now this is a US study, but we find a lot of these statistics are mirroring much the same in Canada and the US. 40% of employees stated that they are at least somewhat likely to leave their current job in the next 3 to 6 months. So you already don't have enough people. And now to find out that in your industry, up to 40% of people are thinking about leaving. Excuse me. So I would then pose another question that on top of this, I want you to think about it in terms of those 38 to 40% of people that are leaving. What percentage of those do you think are leaving because your company is not paying them enough, or maybe they're paying them enough, but that employee wants more money? You may be surprised to learn that only 4% of these people in this study said that the reason they're thinking of leaving is because of compensation. So no, they're leaving for other reasons, and compensation is a lot further down on that list of why they're leaving. And again, particularly these factors matter less to younger and the upcoming younger generation. So look, this is a long way to say you've got a labor shortage tsunami headed your way. If it's not already here, I would suggest a lot of it is here. And all the research is telling us that the single most important thing that you can do at a local level to help your company and to help your crews and that to fix this issue is to reevaluate your skill set and all managers' skill set within the organization and improve the culture of your teams. And why is that important? Because your industry is already not necessarily doing a great job of marketing itself as an employer of choice. The industry, be it aggregates or concrete and the like, carries a misunderstood reputation as it being a dirty job, as it's called, and not something that many young people aspire to pursue as a profession. So as those baby boomers retire, who are you looking to recruit? You're looking to recruit the younger generations. And many young people do not aspire to pursue this profession. Most young people are also unaware of the many career paths available in the construction industry. And I know a lot of companies out there doing a really good job of getting out into high schools and trying to become an employer of choice. And they're using tactics that are saying, hey, take a look at the transformation of a job site. This includes high-tech equipment, design tools, automated equipment, and that might make it more appealing to some of the younger generations. Couple more stats. I told you I was going to have statistics in here, but we're going to get to the good stuff here in a second. Did you know that just another study I found, 65% of employees believe that they can find a better position elsewhere. Now, again, another staggering statistic. Again, you're already facing labor shortages. The people that you do have, you want to retain. Studies are showing us that 40% are thinking of leaving you. That last study we looked at, they're thinking of leaving you in the next 3 to 6 months, and 65% of them believe they can get a better job elsewhere. So all in all, lots of big challenges out there for you as a supervisor in trying to maintain a crew or some stability in your workplace. Because of those people that do leave your organization, it tends to have a ripple effect. So when one leaves, it often leads to statistics show that once one leaves, it leads to others leaving as well. So unless efforts are refocused on retention, you as supervisors will be unable to deliver on company goals or your own goals. You may work for a company that has given you specific key performance indicators and the like. So you may be unable to deliver on your goals, company goals, satisfy customers, drive performance, and affect change. So you have a significant impact on the turnover and retention of your immediate team. Again, think of you when we talk about people quitting, not a company, but a boss. It's you that represents the organization to your employees. It's you that is dealing directly with your employees and building a positive relationship with those people. It's you that ensures that work environment is devoid of hostility and tension. It's you that ensures it is a safe, that you're adhering to safety guidelines, and it's you that has a significant impact on these individuals. How do you impact them? Through engagement. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this at the back end of the hour. Employees who believe their supervisor cares about them as a person are more likely to be engaged than those are not. I'll park that for now because we'll get to that in a few minutes. Supervisors who are involved with their staff, involved with and aware of their staff can serve as an early warning system for triggers that lead to turnover. So we already know a lot of your people, 40% of your people are thinking of leaving you in the next 3 to 6 months. That's what this is talking about. If you're involved with them, is there a trigger or something that you can do to prevent that from happening before they leave? And finally, supervisors who have a direct connection with the individuals on your team can tailor the employee experience to meet the needs of individuals who report to them. Now, I know I can't see your faces, who's on our call today or who's on the webinar today. So I can't make a guess as to age or generation and that. And I don't want to make this all about generation, but I'm telling you, some of the previous generations were not as interested in some of these things on our screen. Look at that the first blue box on our left. in caring about our employees. The middle one, being involved with our employees, or the third one, having a direct connection. They're going to say, who cares about these things? What matters is getting the concrete laid down, or what matters is, getting that aggregate crushed. But again, not understanding generational differences, where we're now seeing that supervisors have to have an impact in other ways rather than just production. A recent Gallup poll found that 52% of exiting employees said their supervisor, that's you, could have done something to prevent them from leaving. But only 1/3 of those same employees said that their boss or their manager or supervisor actually even bothered to have a conversation with them. So now, not every employee can be saved. We're not putting it all on your shoulders. I hope HR or others in your company aren't coming to you saying you own the retention problem completely, because not every employee can be saved, particularly in this industry. Some people get into it and then find out that it's just not meant for them. But analysis does show that much more can be done to decrease the employee turnover rate. And yeah, guess what? A lot of that does have to do with you. Now, before we jump in, like I said, it's not all just to do with you, their boss. Sure, a lot of people are leaving because they just, they're quitting their bosses. They don't like their supervisor. Here's a lot of other reasons why, or research here in Canada is telling us other people are leaving. And, insufficient pay we talked about, but people are overworked, underappreciated. They don't respect their senior leaders, lack of work-life balance, and there's a poor company culture. If we looked at that list and struck off insufficient pay, I would say that you as a supervisor could impact the remaining factors that they're on the screen. So you as a frontline supervisor have a big role in keeping and retaining people. So let's look at some of the skill set that you may need in order to assist in the retention of your people. So this is an exercise. I just want you to think about this. Pardon me. Just consider it. We don't need to do it as a chat feature. Because we don't want to out you or any of the companies or supervisors that you may have had. But I'd like you to think for a second, or reflect on some of the supervisors or managers that you've had during your career, and then I want you to think about those that were your favorites, and consider this for a moment. What were some of the positive behaviors or characteristics, and what made them stand out to you? Now, conversely, I want you to also consider the same exercise, but I want you to consider, let me go back. Who was your least favorite manager or supervisor, and what were some of their behaviors or characteristics, and what made them stand out for you? This can make it a really short, you could do a list. On the left-hand side of a piece of paper, write down all those characteristics that you thought made them a great supervisor. Conversely, what made somebody your least favorite? And then that could probably take up the rest of our webinar. And that could likely be your to-do list, is do the things on the left-hand side, don't do the things on the right-hand side. But also I want you to consider this. Think about your best employees. Why do you think they choose to stay? Excuse me. And why do you think they choose to leave? You could do this also for your not so great employees, but I wonder if you would find any correlation between what you saw as great supervisors and why you think your best employees stay. And I bet you would find a correlation that would align with what we saw a few slides ago, that supervisors who took an interest, who cared and listened to their employees, have a significant impact on who is a good employee and who chooses to stay. But let's dive into what of your skills matter most for retention, and let's see what the data tells us. So I already know through that exercise that in your mind, you've got some ideas of what are some of your favorite characteristics in a supervisor. Let's find out what the research actually tells us in terms of the skills that matter. What we're finding is connected supervisors matter very much. They catch the intent to leave. In other words, you catch the intent of the employee to leave long before it occurs because you're connected to them. Empathetic supervisors listen to employee problems. They receive employee feedback. They help prioritize the workload or manage work-life balance issues when necessary. Being professional. Professional supervisors lead by example. Leading by example meaning you model the behavior that your employees expect of you, but you're modeling the behavior that is expected of the organization. In other words, you lead a crew safely. You lead with respect and integrity. We're going to dive into each of these a little bit more. Inspiring. And what do we know here? Well, we know that inspiring supervisors often or I should say, offer regular employee recognition and encouragement. So you don't need to be on a pulpit being overly inspiring, but you are inspiring through regular feedback with your employees and encouraging them along the way, which leads me to my final one, which is being a coach or a mentor, because we know that people who coach and coaching supervisors help employees, particularly new employees, find their way within their organization. And there's a huge amount of research out there that says if you can make those first few days, weeks, months matter, and coach those employees through their orientation phase and get them up to a managing skill set early on, your ability to keep them in the long term is significantly greater. So let's look at this as a graphic. So as you can see, there's our 1 through 5, connected, empathetic, leading by example, inspiring, and coaching. And the one common thread that's evidenced on our screen there is that effective communication is what keeps this all together. So let's look at each one individually in terms of you being a great supervisor and motivating your employees to stay. And how do you do it? Well, let's look at the first one, and that is connected supervisors catch the intent to leave long before it occurs. Did you know that 43% of former employees, people who have left your organization, say that they spoke to a coworker about their intention to leave before they actually left? And 36% were searching for a new job 1 or more months before leaving their last job. And that other data shows us that in your industry, it's upwards of 38% are thinking of leaving months before they actually did. What does this mean to you as a supervisor? This means there is a window of opportunity for you as a supervisor where you could have made a difference. Again, right now we're talking about being connected. If you were connected to the employees and having regular conversations, there may have been, we're not putting it all on you, but there may have been an opportunity for you to catch them before it occurs. And yet we know that more than half of the exiting employees say that in the 3 months before they left, and neither their manager nor any other leader in the organization talked to them about their job satisfaction or their future with the organization. And how easy is that? Over coffee, simple where do you see yourself in 5 years? Do you want to be more than a laborer? Would you like to move into other roles? And it doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to be an annual review. We don't have to put it off till next December when we do our annual review. These can be casual conversations, having casual conversations about the job and their future with the organization. What else do we know about connected supervisors? We know that many employees rarely receive any feedback from their managers. So I ask you again, reflect on how often are you receiving actual feedback from your supervisor or your boss? I'm not talking about daily tasks lists, go do this or go do that. I'm talking about actual feedback, again, on your job satisfaction and your career plans and the like. Nearly half of all employees say they get feedback from their supervisors only a few times a year or less. So things like annual performance reviews or semi-annual reviews. And that's not good enough. Again, if we had more time to talk generational differences, yes, a baby boomer is going to tell you that even having the annual feedback once a year is probably once too many. And with each subsequent generation and younger generation, they're wanting feedback far more regularly. And by far more regularly, I'm talking to the degree of, once a week, if not greater. So what does this mean to you as the supervisor? The single biggest change, and that's why I put number one up here as number one, the biggest change that you can make is increase the frequency of conversations you're having with your employees. These don't need to be scripted. This is about you being connected. This makes it more likely that you will be able to identify any of their concerns, roadblocks, signs of disengagement long before that employee makes the decision to depart. So I want you to ask yourself this: how often are you giving your employees feedback? Again, I don't need an answer. It's somewhat rhetorical, but I want you to consider that when you go back to work today, tomorrow, or next week. How often are you giving feedback? And maybe could you increase it to stay connected to your people? Let's look at our second factor, and that is that empathetic supervisors listen to problems, receive employee feedback, and help prioritize the workload. Let's dive into that a little bit more. Supervisors often feel powerless in the face of employee problems. In particular, hey, I came from HR. I get it. It's like an employee has a problem or a mental health issue or family issues or work-life balance issues. Yikes, that's got to be an HR problem. And so I get it that you may feel powerless in the face of an employee problem, but simply listening may not feel like anything special or helpful. But guess what? It does. It means a great deal. Employees whose supervisor is willing to listen to their work-related problems are 62% less likely to be burnt out. So in other words, sometimes people just need to get it off their chest. They don't need to go to HR. They don't need to make they don't need necessarily time off or a mental health day. They just need somebody to listen to them. So in other words, listening matters. It matters a great deal to employee retention. It also helps your employees feel like their voice and their opinion matters. And I think we all know from just watching the news or reading things online, the increase in the Canadian workplace in terms of mental health issues and the like is on the rise. So anything that you can do, again, to stay, as a number one showed us, to stay connected to your people, and as this factor says, and to listen to your people, can really help. Now, in the event it gets to be a larger mental health issue, and that maybe then it does become an HR issue, or maybe then you need to help your employees know how to access employee and family assistance programs or external counseling in the event that your employer offers that. You don't always have to go this one alone. What else can we say about empathetic supervisors who listen? You may not always be able to reduce the amount of stress on the person or reduce the amount of work that needs to be done, but you can help in some ways to sort or organize work for the employees. Now, in the absence of communications, employees feel anxious about details that don't matter, or they may feel overwhelmed by the amount of work that needs to be done. And that's why listening to them and having conversations with them, it can assist. What does this mean to you as a supervisor? Well, a few simple words from you goes a long way to show that you care. Simply like, I've got your back, or we're in this together. And that can make a difference. Our third factor, professional supervisors lead by example. What do we mean by this? This just simply means, and This could be nothing more than just this slide. Listen, here's the facts. Model the behavioral expectations you have of your employees. If you expect them to act with professionalism, integrity, trust, fairness, treat customers well, operate safely, and the like, then guess what? Do the same. Align your values with the expectations of your employees, but also don't forget that you want to align with your company values and priorities. If they say safety is our number one priority, then safety needs to be your number one priority as well. Key to that is that last statement on the screen there. You need to act with professionalism, integrity, trust, and fairness. You also need to be consistent. Far too often in my practice, in HR consulting, I find that organizations get themselves into trouble when they're not being consistent. In other words, we treat our star employees a little bit different than we treat our average or not so or below average employees. But being consistent is really key. It exhibits to the rest of your staff that you're a strong leader to be respected. You need to be consistent in your approach and your expectations of people, so you don't have different expectations of different people. And being consistent builds trust and helps earn the respect of your team. And again, if you're looking for a promotion and the like, I'm not just talking your team and those beneath you in an organizational hierarchy, but those above you as well. We know that when a leader is consistent in their approach, their team can better understand where they're coming from, they're easier to work with, and the like. So be consistent. That's key to leading by example. And along with leading by example also comes a very important factor, which is being a firm leader. And what do we mean by that? That means don't be a pushover. You do not gain the respect of your employees by being a pushover. Most employees expect their boss to be firm. It doesn't mean that you need to be a brutal dictator and the like. It just means that you need to be firm. And what does this mean to you? Make decisions and stick to them if you feel it's the right choice, even if it's not popular with everyone. Now, when I say that, if you need to change course or to improve your approach and like, of course, you're free to change your mind. You don't have to just stick with it, but stick with it if it's the right thing to do, not because it's a more popular choice with your employees. So that's number 3, be a professional supervisor, lead by example by being professional, consistent, and firm. Our 4th factor, just checking our time here, be inspiring. It's like, well, wait a minute, I didn't get hired to be inspiring. I was the best driver or the best dispatcher, or the best at whatever it was you were doing. And now we're saying, but we need you to also now be inspiring. What do we mean by that? Let's not overthink it. Let's break this down. Inspiring supervisors offer regular employee recognition and encouragement. As simple as that. Now, believe it or not, feeling cared for and having friends at work are essential drivers of engagement. Now, I got to be honest with you, a lot of this work comes out of Gallup, like the Gallup poll group. It's a fascinating study. We'll learn more about it in a couple of slides. I too admit the first time I read this, feeling cared for and having friends at work are essential drivers of engagement. I kind of thought, oh, come on, that's a little too fluffy for me. That was a little too fluffy for my HR head to wrap my brain around. But it's proven time after time after time, this is a key driver of engagement. Now, this doesn't mean you need to have, instead of having a morning toolbox talk, that you're going to have a morning hug. Let's talk a little bit more. What do we mean by this? Quite simply, it means this. When you, as a supervisor, increase the frequency, again, we're back to conversations, increase the frequency of your conversation, there is a greater chance that your employees are going to feel engaged in the workplace. What does this mean to you as a supervisor? When employees feel engaged, they're eager to come to work, they're ready to give their best, they feel connected to the team and to the organization, and not surprisingly, engaged workers are much less likely to quit. However, 85% 5% of employees globally are not engaged or actually actively disengaged. This is the data I was telling you about. This is my kind of stuff. Let me put it into, let's take a look at what we're looking at. See the green line at the top and across the axes on the bottom, you can see that this poll started over 21 years ago, and that's showing the percentage of actively engaged workers. This is these stats right here. I couldn't find the Canadian slide in time for this presentation there, but it's in around almost identical. That only on the far right-hand side of your screen there, what is this telling us? That at any given time, only 34% of your workforce is actively engaged. So think about your crew, think about your team, think about your broader team at your company. Does that seem about right? 34%. At any given time, let's look at the darker line below. 16% of your team is actively disengaged. And when I say your team, I'm saying if your team was average, as shown in this poll. Now, how accurate is this poll? Not only is it, well, as of this year, it will be 23 years old. This is ongoing data. It has to date input from 2.7 million workers across North America, which span over 100,000 different teams in 50 different industries. So all in all, I would say this is pretty solid data. Now, if we looked at, we know 34% of your team are engaged. Yay, those are your A players. They like coming to work every day. 16% actively disengaged. If we added those two numbers together, that's 50. That means 50% of your team are really not actively engaged or disengaged. So they're, what I would say, they're showing up for the paycheck. So again, not really great statistics in terms of employee engagement. What do we know about people that are not actively engaged at work? They have higher absenteeism. They have, if they're actively engaged at work, they have less absenteeism, fewer safety incidents, fewer product defects. They have higher productivity, and overall, they make you more profit. So all in all, your employees being engaged matter very much to you as a supervisor, because if your bonus or any part of your performance is tracked on your team's absentee issue incidences, safety issues, customer satisfaction, and the like, then you can see how engagement leads to that. So when we talked about, I'm going to go back a couple slides just to reiterate that first line there, so that, believe it or not, feeling cared for, having friends at work are essential drivers of engagement. Let's look at the actual study that is behind all of this statistics, and it's called the Q12. I cite it at one of our last slides, so if you want to look more into it. And these are simply the Q12. It's 12 questions. That's all it stands for, is starting at number 1 is at the bottom, going all the way up to 12. These are the questions that have been studied by 2.7 million people over all of these years. And these are the stats that we just looked at as a culmination of that research into employee engagement, where they looked at these 12 specifically worded measures about engagement. So if we looked at some of these questions, it's like, I have a best friend at work, or at work, my opinions seem to count. Or basic needs near the bottom. I know what is expected of me at work. So I would challenge you to, maybe print off this slide and keep it near and dear to you, to think, are you leading with these factors in mind? Again, 3 million people have given us the research that says these are the factors that seem to matter in terms of your employees being engaged. What do we know about engaged employees? They don't leave. They stay and they're faithful to their company. So again, take a look at question 5 under the green factor there. My supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. This aligns with all the other studies that we've looked at up until now, that is making this retention thing really simple. Is like, are you talking to your employees? Are you listening to your employees? Are you connected with your employees? Are you having conversations with them about job satisfaction and how their job is going? So at the end, this looks like a lot of data and graphs in that. At the end, it's pretty simple. If we just looked at those 12 questions, these are the 12 elements that are going to best predict employee engagement. Pretty simple stuff. Has someone talked to me about my progress? Has somebody, or does my opinion seem to count? That same study also found that it takes more than a 20% pay raise to lure most employees away from a supervisor who engages them, and next to nothing to poach a disengaged worker. But surprise, surprise, it's not your underperformers that are being poached. You know, typically if your competition is poaching from you, they're looking for your top performers. But it's going to take more than a 20% increase, and that's a lot of money, to lure them away if they're engaged. That's how impactful employee engagement is. Okay, back to being inspiring. I should have changed that word because like I said, it sounds a little fluffy even for my ears, but let's read the rest of it. You offer regular recognition and encouragement. What this means to you as a supervisor. When you increase the frequency of feedback, there's a greater chance that employees will feel that somebody cares about them. Now, you can go further, you can ask questions and listen to them with genuine interest and concern. You can also then weave in recognition into those informal conversations. We don't need to wait till the end of the year to do formal recognition in the form of an annual review, or what I call recognition rituals. It can be a daily or weekly occurrence on your crew as well within your team. People leave jobs when they feel their work doesn't matter, period. Let's look at our fifth and final a factor in how to motivate your employees to stay, and that's coaching. What do we mean by that? Well, coaching supervisors help employees find their way within your organization. This is particularly true of new employees, people that are new to your team. Maybe they were in another part of the organization. Studies have shown that coaching can increase employee engagement by up to 20%. So again, engagement leads to people staying. What can we do to encourage it? Well, coaching them is one. Have a tough words this morning. Have a coaching culture to retain your best talent. What does this mean to you as a supervisor? Well, coaching strengthens the relationship and trust between you and your team, meaning I've got your back, I'm here to help you learn this skill. Coaching enhances your employees' desire to contribute in the workplace because they understand what they're doing and why it's important. So simply put, there's literally hundreds of thousands of articles out there that you could Google on coaching out in the workplace or mentoring in the workplace. Let's put it simply. Workplace coaching is the process of you equipping your employees with the knowledge or the tools and the resources that they need for them to be effective. And let's face it, your job is easier when they are effective. So don't discount your role as a coach. And what does that look like? It's easy to say, yeah, go out there and be a coach. What does that mean in the workplace? I think if I told you to go out and coach lacrosse team or coach your daughter's soccer club, that we would get that. But what does it look like in the workplace? Well, simply put, you set goals for your employees and explain why those goals are important, as opposed to setting the goal, hey, just go and deliver that product or crush that rock or make that masonry wall and the like. That's one thing, but explain why that's important and how that fits into the overall goals of the organization. Provide regular feedback on how the employee is doing, just as if you were coaching somebody, again, in lacrosse or soccer. Celebrate the success and the positive progression of your employees, particularly if they're learning and growing and developing. And finally, give them a safe space to not only learn and make mistakes, but to ask questions. Okay, let's wrap this all up. I had said at the beginning that there were the 5 factors, but it is all brought together with effective communication skills, because this is all very well and good, but I'm saying, number 1, you need to be connected. Number 2, you need to be empathetic and listen to your people. You need to be a professional supervisor and lead by example. You need to inspire others through regular feedback and give encouragement and recognition. And number 5, you need to coach. And that's all very well and good. But if you're not an effective communicator, it's going to be tough to do all of those things. So here's the quickest effective communication skills course in history. We're not going to do that because of time, but let's just jump right in. That's not to say I don't want you to reflect on that. And I would like you to think about, what is your definition of a good communicator? Who is a boss or a leader that you've had in your organization who you felt was an effective communicator, who made you feel comfortable in understanding the messages or the direction and the like, and who listened to you as well as just spoke with you? Think of some of those factors and other skills that you can learn from that person. So here's a few communication tips for you as supervisors. Because, and again, and why is this important? Because creating a well-functioning and welcoming work environment for your employees can lead to just amazing outcomes. And effective communication is one variable that leads to improved performance and improved morale on your team. So let's take a look at the list of communication tips that managers and supervisors may find helpful. And that's 1, be straightforward and direct in all communications, whether it's written and or spoken. And when I say straightforward and direct, I mean, again, we talked about being a firm leader. Don't beat around the bush, as they say. Don't use a lot of ums and ahs, and I kind of sort of meant this. Be direct. Say what needs to be said, whether it's written or whether it's spoken. Second point, listen when you are not speaking. We could do a whole 1-hour course just on listening, because most people, hearing is, so long as you're not hearing impaired, hearing is pretty inherent. It's just something that we possess. Listening is not the same as hearing. People think, well, yeah, no, I heard you. Two different things. Listen when you're not speaking. You can also paraphrase and reflect back what somebody has said to you to make sure you understood them correctly. And that just sounds like this. So if I hear you correctly, what you're saying to me is, and that's one way to ensure that what you're hearing and what the person is saying are one and the same thing. Third communication tip, be courteous. You're a leader in your organization. Avoid using angry or threatening or a demeaning tone of voice. It's not necessary to be a leader. Which leads to the next point, give feedback. Ensure that you are talking to your people. You're just not doing it in demeaning, angry, or threatening tone of voice. Our entire conversation up until now really has been about providing feedback, listening to your people, having conversations with them, recognizing them, and inspiring them. So get comfortable doing that. When assigning a task, be clear about your expectations. Don't leave it to your employees to guess, and then when they falter, they are reprimanded for it. Be clear, which leads to this point. Consider giving written instructions or expected outcomes of a task. Why do I say that? Again, we don't have time to get into the generational issues, but when we think about generational issues, when we think about multicultural, English as a second language, increased immigration, and the like, that there often is more than one good way to give instructions, and it may not be verbal. And again, so think about people either with maybe a learning disability or English as a second language. Some people may prefer to have the instructions written down. So again, that's a matter of getting to know your team, getting to know their preferences. And final tip on communication tips, be clear about consequences. I'm a huge fan of consequences. That's the HR in me. And when I'm talking about being clear about communications, that means be clear about the consequences of not completing their work, be clear on the consequences of them, missing work, on safety violations, and the like. And what do I mean by that? It's just as simple as the consequences of you not completing this task could be what? Let them know that there could be a consequence. I know that has a negative connotation. It could also have a positive connotation. Once you finish this task and it's done well, then I'm going to transfer you or promote you or give you a bigger task or a better project, and the like, but always establish consequences. Our brains have a reward center in it, and so don't discount the importance of that. Also, just before we wrap, because I know we have 1 minute left and I think we're just about on time here, non-verbal communication. So we're talking a lot this whole hour about communication. And that typically comes in the form of verbal, particularly when you're on a job site and when you're leading a team. But a lot of research has looked into the impact of our non-verbal communication, and it's startling. This work has been done over a period of time. I should have cited it at the end. It's Dr. Abraham Mehabrin, I believe is his name, and he has found that the words we choose have a 7% impact on what is being interpreted. The tone of voice has a 38% impact, and body language a 55% impact. So what does this mean to you as a supervisor? What is the lesson here? And surprisingly, it's rather shocking. And that is that your words at the workplace actually account for very little. The pitch and the tone of your voice, the rhythm and speed of your spoken words, how you use pauses of those words will likely tell more about what's being communicated by the words alone. Have you ever watched a movie with the volume off? You can sometimes get a sense by just the way fingers are pointed or the body language of the person. So consider your gestures, your postures, your pose, and all of your nonverbal expressions, because they are sending your team a lot of subtle signals. Pay attention to more than just the words. Be aware of your body language. It's conveying a huge amount of information. And as supervisors, it is very important to understand that what you're communicating is as important as how you intentionally communicate it. So let's recap what we've talked about today. The supervisory skills that matter most for retention is 1, your ability to stay connected to your people. 2, listen to your people to help them solve problems. 3, lead by example always. Be consistent, be firm. 4, be inspiring, give people regular feedback. And finally, coach your employees towards success. So with that takes us 2 minutes over. I apologize for infringing on your time. Let me just wrap. There's a couple reflection questions in there and a couple of resources for you. And with that, I say thank you. There's my contact information. My website, always happy to hear from you. And then just before I turn over to you, Dan and Alicia, I'll just say I've built in an entire appendix into this presentation on understanding generational differences, because that has a whole lot to do with retention, because it matters very much by generation. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, I've included some resources at the back of the presentation. And with that, over to you.
Thank you very much, Pamela. Very relevant and valuable presentation and information. And just for our participants, we will be sending out the slide deck so that they can see those. I'm sure your plan is to share that, correct?
Absolutely. I'll be sending it to you after.
Pamela, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure, as always.
Thanks to our participants, and we will see everybody at our next Talent Tuesday. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.